Sometimes Pokemon heroically sacrifice themselves for the greater good. You would probably assume that it's bad if your Pokemon faints and is no longer with us in this mortal realm, but sometimes it can be advantageous and competitive to sacrifice your Pokemon deliberately, with a plan. There are many moves in Pokemon that directly sacrifice your Pokemon for some sort of advantage. And there are also maybe other reasons that you might want your Pokemon to perish earlier than they expected, for your own gain. Why don't we take a look at the concept of self-sacrifice in Pokemon? Not only moves that have the ultimate price to pay when executed, but also other reasons you may want to throw your Pokemon to the birds. The most well-known self-sacrificial move in Pokemon is probably Explosion. Explosion is a move that has existed since the very first game, and your Pokemon must perish to use it. But there is significant upside to this. Explosion is a very high power move. In Gen 1 it is a 170 base power, and this is actually buffed in Gen 2 up to a 250 base power. Explosion also halves the enemy's defense stat during damage, leading to ludicrous amounts of damage. Explosion will usually one-hit KO the opponent if they don't resist it. So the most basic way to get an advantage out of Explosion is to trade with an enemy. You faint, but so do they, because of the overwhelming amount of damage you're dealing. And this makes sense, especially if you've already gotten a bit of value out of the exploding Pokemon. Then you've actually made a positive trade. Explosion is most efficiently used when your Pokemon is already at low health, and it's achieved some things throughout the battle. It goes out with one last hurrah, because it's about to perish anyway. But on the way out, it goes with a bang and brings somebody else with it to the great beyond. That's the perfect outcome that you can hope to achieve from Explosion. But in the earlier generations of Pokemon, generations 1 to 3, you can also use Explosion to abuse a mechanical quirk. You see, in these generations, if a Pokemon faints, the enemy actually doesn't get to execute the rest of their turn. Their turn just gets cancelled. And this is a big deal, because it means they can't even switch, they can't heal, they can't do anything. So that's actually another reason you might want to use Explosion, even if your Pokemon has no attack stat and the damage isn't important. Just cancelling the enemy's turn can result in a significant advantage and really keep momentum in your favor. Some applications of this might be a Smeargle exploding against a Skarmory in Gen 3 to prevent it from making a layer of spikes, because the self-fainting will deny them from taking a turn and allow you to switch into a special attacker that forces them out, and denying them from making spikes, which is good for you. You can also combo this with a Trapper, which is very useful. Smeargle might do the same thing to explode against Skarmory and bring in Magneton. And in this case, the enemy can't actually even react to this or stop it because of the self-fainting. They don't get to take a turn, they don't get to click a Roar or anything that would prevent this, so you get a guaranteed trap. Gengar can also do this in Gen 3 against Blissey. You can explode against a Blissey, deal pretty good damage, just due to the sheer power of Explosion. And the Blissey won't be able to heal. You will deny their turn, and you can switch in Dugtrio, who traps Blissey and deals the remaining amount of HP for a guaranteed trap. The ability to sacrifice yourself to guarantee a follow-up can be very powerful, and also to prevent the enemy from taking their turn. And there are other ways to activate this mechanic in older gens too. Recoil moves are moves that actually damage the Pokemon that used them when used. A percentage of the damage you dealt is received by you as the attacker, which is designed as a drawback, but you can sometimes use this to your advantage, because if you self-KO with a recoil move, if the recoil is enough to actually KO your Pokemon, you activate this mechanic where the enemy cannot act because you have fainted. This allows you to deny the enemy's turn and switch into a follow-up, whether it's a Dugtrio or just something that threatens whatever you're attacking. You can also do this by sacrificing your Pokemon to spikes. If they are low enough health to die to the spikes, you can switch in that Pokemon, KO them, and then get a guaranteed follow-up. And this is actually able to create checkmate scenarios more than anything else, because the switch is the first thing that happens in a turn. So because you switch and then faint a Pokemon upon switching into it, the enemy literally can't even stop you. They can't even switch out preemptively or something, because you've already initiated this sacrifice, erased their turn from existence, and you get to act. This is hard to set up though, because your Pokemon has to be in the range of dying to spikes. And if they are in the range of dying to spikes, you're probably in a bad position anyway. But In the right circumstance, this can be an incredibly powerful tool and be an incredibly powerful momentum play. That is also a powerful reason one might want to sacrifice their own Pokemon. Now, from Gen 4 onwards, this mechanic was changed, and fainting no longer erases the enemy's turn. Probably more of a logical system. Even though I do like the early game fainting mechanics, it makes more sense that your opponent can take a turn. So you can no longer explode in the face of a Blissey and prevent them from healing. Now if you explode against a Blissey, they can heal all the damage back, potentially, and erase all of your progress. But exploding is still great in Gen 4 for the high damage and the trading potential of it. And in this new environment, there is also another reason to explode, and that is to deny Rapid Spin. Rapid Spin is an attack that, upon connecting with the opponent, will remove all of the hazards on your side of the field. It's a very important move in competitive for utility, to remove entry hazards. But if you do not have a target, if your opponent has fainted and there's no one there, Rapid Spin won't work. Rapid Spin will have no effect, because you actually have to land the attack and connect with it for it to remove the hazards on your side of the field. So this could be a reason you might want to deliberately faint one of your Pokemon, not only to deal a lot of damage with Explosion, but also to deny the enemy from removing the hazards on their side of the field, maintaining some of your advantage. And this is a big part of the strategy behind Azelf lead sets. These sets will often aim to just set Stealth Rock at the start of a battle in Gen 4 OU, and usually then they will explode, ideally trading with an opponent and getting rid of them, but also acting as a form of counterplay against Rapid Spin, which could remove the Stealth Rock that you have just set. By exploding, there is no target, your Stealth Rock always remains up, and having Stealth Rock up is incredibly important and powerful. You can then switch into whatever you want and keep the pressure up. From Gen 5 onwards, Explosion was nerfed once again. Now Explosion no longer has the defense halving effect, so its damage output is therefore completely halved. So it's a far worse move from Gen 5 onwards, but it is still sometimes used on sets like this Azelf set to deny hazard removal. And luckily for Pokemon like this, you are also able to deny defog from occurring using this strategy. Defog was changed in Gen 6 to be able to clear hazards from both sides of the field. But just like Rapid Spin, it has to actually connect with the enemy to work and remove the hazard. So if there's no enemy, it won't work. And this can be a great momentum play in exactly the same way, to maintain hazards and keep pressure up on very aggressive teams. Landorus Therian would sometimes run Explosion for this purpose, to prevent the Stealth Rocks that it sets from being removed by either Rapid Spin or Defog. One of the funniest uses of Explosion that I'm aware of in Pokemon history is in a Gen 3 Pokemon archetype called Boom Spam, which is as the name suggests. The idea is that you run 5 Pokemon that carry Explosion, and the last Pokemon is a Suicune. And basically what you want to do is explode with all 5 of these Pokemon and trade with the enemy, ideally. And once the dust has settled, then you have exploded with all 5 of your exploders. You just have a Suicune left, and you have hopefully done some really good damage to the enemy team with all these explosives, and defeated most of them. The reason that you want to do this is because having a Suicune last is really powerful. Suicune is a boost sweeper, meaning it uses the move Calm Mind to boost up its special attack and special defense, to increase its stats to the point where it can sweep everything, and also have a high enough special defense to live any incoming special attack. Usually, you would be able to use Roar against Suicune, a move that forces the enemy Pokemon out, and use this to get rid of all their Calm Mind boosts. If a Pokemon switches out, they lose all of their boosts. But if you only have one Pokemon on your team, Roar will not work because there's no Pokemon that can be forced in. You only have one. That's why you explode 5 times for the Suicune last, so it can Calm Mind without being stopped by Roar, and then easily sweep in an end game. This strategy is actually a lot more effective than it sounds, to be honest. And this strategy also embodies another reason you might want to sacrifice your Pokemon, to create this last mon situation where your final Pokemon is no longer able to be roared out. And that could be a win condition, whether it's with a Calm Mind Suicune, or a Dragon Dance Salamence or Tyranitar, or an Agility Metagross. There are situations where you actually want your Pokemon to faint so that your final Pokemon cannot be roared out. Sometimes that's through explosion, sometimes that's just through perishing via natural means, whatever it may be. This can be a genuine game plan that can win you a battle. Another name for this boom spam team archetype is Costco Offense, because it involves 5 big booms. And there are 2 more attacks to speak of that deal damage at the cost of your Pokemon's life. One of them is Misty Explosion, which is a fairy-type special attack that can only be executed if your Pokemon faints in the process. This one does not deal as much damage as normal Explosion, it only has 100 power. And on Misty Terrain, if Misty Terrain is active, it has a 1.5x power. The main application I've seen for this is on Slowpuff as a sticky web setter. It can set a sticky web entry hazard and then click Misty Explosion to sacrifice itself, purely to deny rapid spin and defog, not even for the damage, which is not even that high for an explosive move. And the Misty Terrain bonus is scarcely worth the effort. This is actually used in Ubers as a sticky web setter because it's reliable, and Slowpuff has the anti-spin and defog technology built in thanks to Misty Explosion. Pretty cool. And then there is Final Gambit, which is a damn interesting move design, I think. Very cool move. Final Gambit will deal damage to the opponent equal to your HP stat upon being used, and then you will faint. So this could potentially deal a lot of damage if you're a high HP Pokemon, but you have to actually be at full HP for the maximum potential, because it uses your current HP. If you're only on 1 HP, it will do 1 damage. In singles, the main user of this I'm aware of is Excelgor, who is very fast and can set spikes and then click Final Gambit to sacrifice itself, which synergizes with the spikes, as it also denies rapid spin and defog. I believe Annihilate has also used this in various contexts, mostly in competitive doubles I think, but you could also use this in singles as a alternative way to use Annihilate. This one does not come up that often, but it is a damn interesting move, wouldn't you agree? I've spoken so much already about setting hazards that I feel I should talk about the general concept of a Sacrificial Lead. These are Pokemon that you start the game off with, and their whole job is to create entry hazards and then perish. They're not aiming to stick around for long. Although they don't have a move necessarily that just ends their own existence right then and there, they are not aiming to survive. They're usually expecting to be attacked, set Stealth Rock, that's the most important one, then perhaps set some spikes or do one other thing and then exit this mortal coil forever. I've mentioned Azelf, who actually just explodes itself after setting Stealth Rock, but there is also Aerodactyl in Gens 4 and 5, who is a good Stealth Rock setting lead because it's fast, and it has Taunt to prevent the enemy from setting their Stealth Rock. Aerodactyl can actually run double edge on purpose to feint itself after being hit into the focus sash for the same reason as all these other Pokemon explode, to deny rapid spin, so that's kind of funny, using recoil to do that. And there are various examples, of course, of Pokemon that just aim to set hazards and then feint. In Gen 9, there is Glimmora, who is the most modern example of such a concept. In fact, Glimmora creates toxic spikes on the field when it's hit. If you attack this guy, it just makes toxic spikes, which is clearly very much designed around feinting on purpose to set hazards. It also gets Stealth Rock and spikes itself. The fact that this archetype of Pokemon exists just goes to show you how powerful entry hazards are in competitive singles, especially Stealth Rock. From Gens 4 to 7, this was an incredibly dominant strategy, by far the best move in the game. Gen 8 at least introduced the boots, which granted hazard immunity, but even still, Stealth Rock is very powerful. Even before Stealth Rock existed though, there were sacrificial leads, like Smeargle, who I talked about before. Smeargle kind of just exists in Gen 3 to click Spore, to put the enemy to sleep, and then make some spikes, and then usually explode to sacrifice itself. You're leading the game off with a Pokemon that is destined to die in just a couple turns, purely to get hazards on the field, and get a bit of momentum with Spore and Explosion. There is also Glalie, who is my personal favorite sacrificial lead of all time. This is a Pokemon that sets spikes, it has Taunt, and it also has Explosion. And because it's an Ice type, it matches up well against Zapdos and Salamence, able to live their hits and strike back with a Stab Ice Beam, which is very funny. Glalie's job is to set spikes and perish in 2 seconds. And that can be worthwhile, that can be enough to enable a very, very aggressive game plan. Quite a bleak existence for these Pokemon though, whose entire life amounts to just setting some caltrops in the field and then blowing themselves up. Not exactly a noble existence for these Pokemon. Blissey is having a much better time. Blissey can live for a long time and eat eggs a lot to heal itself back to fruition. For this reason, Glalie has a deep resentment for Blissey and hates Blissey very much. And this has gone back generations. But I don't get involved with that sort of Pokemon infighting. I'm just the trainer and I'm just trying to win a battle, so that's not really my concern. Another self-sacrificial move in Pokemon is Memento. Memento is an interesting move that will lower the enemy's attack and special attack by 2 stages. And after doing that, your Pokemon will faint. So rather than doing a lot of damage to the enemy Pokemon, like with Explosion, Memento aims to weaken the enemy Pokemon beyond repair, lowering their attack and special attack. This is generally not as good as Explosion, because just dealing damage is often better, but there are applications for this, and often this involves utilizing a setup sweeper. Because if you have lowered the enemy's attack and special attack by 2, their damage output will be very low, and they'll sort of just sit there not doing enough damage to threaten anything. So you can Memento, faint your Pokemon, and then switch in to a boost sweeper, who can now safely use a boost in the face of the enemy who is so weakened that they can't fight back. And aggressive teams can use this very well. In fact, you can use Reflect and Light Screen, which also shield your team from incoming damage, and then Memento to pivot into a boost sweeper. And now you have the Reflect and Light Screen helping you out, reducing incoming damage, and the enemy also has reduced stats. So this can be a great combo. One of my favorite teams that makes use of this is a Gen 3 OU team built by the player Vapakuno that I've covered before, which uses Gardevoir with Memento. Gardevoir carries Memento. It also has Hypnosis to put the enemy to sleep. It has Reflect to shield your team from physical damage, and Safeguard as well to prevent status. So if you can get all these effects up and then Memento, you can bring in a Linoone. And Linoone is a very cool Pokemon in Gen 3, because Linoone has the unique combination of Belly Drum and Extreme Speed. Belly Drum is a boosting move that halves your HP, but then maxes out your attack. There's a high cost to using this. It's often impossible to use it because of incoming damage preventing you from using it and then living in to tell the tale. But if you do pull off a Belly Drum, the reward is immense, as you have max attack. And Extreme Speed is the perfect move to combo with Belly Drum, because with a max attack, a high power priority attack here that is dealing incredible damage, you can sweep. If you pull off a Belly Drum with Linoone, you can sweep immediately. It's an incredible combo, but it's very difficult to pull this off. But if the enemy has been struck by Memento and you got to Reflect up and Safeguard as well, which prevents them from statusing you and thunder waving you or something, or burning you to stop your sweep, then you can go to the moon. So Gardevoir and Linoone have a pretty incredible synergy. And it also helps that in Gen 3, this is an old gen where Memento works like Explosion, sort of, and prevents the enemy from taking a turn, because it instantly faints your Pokemon. And if you faint, the enemy doesn't get to act. So you can use Memento to combo and deny the enemy their turn that would have otherwise threatened Linoone. Maybe they would have used an attack that hits Linoone, or a status move that threatens Linoone, but now Memento denied their turn, and you get a very safe switch in to the Linoone, which is appreciated. Now, even though Memento doesn't do that in later gens, because in Gen 4 they changed that mechanic, it is still useful on screen setting teams, in some cases, to do the exact same thing and get a boost sweeper in safely, in a position where they can boost up and try to power through and win the game. That's the idea behind Memento generally. I think in modern day this is not a great self-sacrificial move though. If you're going to pay the iron price and put your life on the line, -2 attack and special attack is not the most amazing effect. Unfortunately, there are also ways to prevent this from happening now, with Goldango existing in the game in Gen 9 and being able to block Memento from happening. So it's not even a guarantee to self-faint. It's also difficult not to compare this to Parting Shot. Parting Shot is a newer move that lowers the enemy's attack and special attack by 1 stage and then pivots you out. Parting Shot may have half the impact of Memento, but it doesn't require you to die in the process, and you can also switch out, which is similar as a momentum pivot. So often Parting Shot is just used instead of Memento, if such a thing is available. But Memento does have its historic use cases, and can be a fun move in the right scenario. In Gen 8, a new move that can be self-sacrificial was introduced. Steel Beam. This is a steel-type special attack with 140 power, 95 accuracy, that causes the user to lose half of their max HP when executed. So if you are at half of your max HP or less when you use this move, you will perish. And sometimes that can be worth it. In certain cases, it is just worth it to deal the damage, whether you faint or not. 140 power is a lot, and it's a very powerful attack right there. Sometimes you must pay the iron price to deal with an important enemy Pokemon. But it can also be used for that wonderfully useful mechanic that denies rapid spin and defog. If you don't exist on the field and you are gone to the ethereal realm, the enemy cannot click rapid spin and they cannot click defog to remove your hazards. That's exactly why Iron Treads here sometimes uses Steel Beam. And Steel Beam also actually does pretty good damage to Glimora, who is a formidable foe that you sometimes have to contend with. And other things too. Some high special damage is pretty good, and the high power of this move makes up for Iron Treads' low special attack at times, while also giving it the benefit of exiting life itself when it suits. Another move that can be used for self-sacrifice is the move Curse, and this has been the case for a long time actually. Curse is a unique move that has two different effects depending on your type. If you're not a ghost type, it's just a boosting move that increases attack and defense by 1 at the cost of -1 speed. But if you're a ghost, Curse will cut your own HP in half to apply a very powerful damage over time effect to the enemy. They will take a 1/4 of their max HP every single turn upon being cursed. And this move can be used as well for self-sacrifice in the same way Steel Beam can. If you are at half HP or less yourself, Curse will faint you. And Mimic You right here has used Curse for this purpose on Trick Room strategies. Trick Room is a field condition that reverses the turn order temporarily so that the slower Pokemon moves first instead of the faster Pokemon. It can be a good offensive strategy to allow slow offensive threats to now operate first and become really, really scary. But the problem with it is that there's only 5 turns. One of the turns is spent executing it, then you have to switch into a Pokemon and it's awkward. That's where Curse comes in. If Curse is used and then Mimic You faints as a result, you get to pivot to anything you want, and you've applied this debilitating damage over time effect to the enemy, so they probably don't want to stay in either. So it's actually a great momentum play. You get something in, with the Trick Room up, you are applying immediate offensive pressure against the enemy, and they have this damn damage over time that they have to contend with. So that's actually a pretty nice way to make Trick Room a bit more of a viable strategy. The self-sacrifice can sometimes be used for momentum, and it's nice when the momentum is paired with a crippling effect on the enemy Pokemon that forces their hand a little bit, like this does. And in my opinion, the best self-sacrificial move in modern competitive singles right now is Healing Wish. And this has actually been a great move for a long time, but I think that at the moment this is the most prominent self-sacrificial move that you see in actual competitive. Healing Wish has a pretty amazing effect. Upon using it, you will faint, and then the next hurt Pokemon that you switch into will be fully healed. The Pokemon will be healed all the way up to maximum HP and will have all of their status ailments cured immediately. And there's another effect of this move that is really good too. If you use Healing Wish, faint, and then switch to an ally that is already at full health, so they haven't taken any damage and they are not statused, the Healing Wish will be stored and will only take effect once you switch into an injured ally that has a status ailment or has taken damage. So you can initially use it just to pivot to something, and then later in the game when you need it, it will heal you. So even if you don't have anything damaged on the turn that you use it, it is stored for later when you need it. And I think that really adds to the flexibility of the move, allowing you to use it as an early game pivoting effect. I think the excellence of this move should be obvious. It has such a good effect that is worth sacrificing your Pokemon. And it's also not conditional based on the enemy game state. Explosion has a risk attached to it. They could switch into a ghost type or something that resists normal. They could heal. Explosion could go wrong. All these other self-sacrificial moves could go wrong. But it's very easy to control the amount of value you get out of Healing Wish. You are pretty much entirely in control. The only thing that needs to happen is you have to execute the move yourself. Sometimes you'll fail to, you'll die before you get to, but if you click Healing Wish, you are in a lot of control as to how much value you get out of that. You can deliberately take damage or get statused on something knowing that you have the healing wish in the back pocket to save you. You can fully heal up a win condition, allowing them to get a bunch of value again. Maybe a Dragonite has Dragon Danced up, gotten a couple KOs and taken a lot of damage in the process. You can healing wish, heal them all the way back up to full and do it all over again. And that's particularly valuable on Dragonite because they get multi-scale again, getting an advantage for being at a full health. So healing wish just gives the most value for a self-sacrifice, and it is also a great momentum play. A common theme of these self-fainting moves is that the momentum you gain from self-fainting is significant. It's basically a free pivot. It allows you to switch into whatever you want, and that can be extremely valuable on aggressive teams especially. Healing Wish is a great move on aggressive teams for that reason, allowing you to get so much more out of your Pokemon at a fast pace, and that's the most important part, is the pace of it. And there is also an extremely similar move to Healing Wish called Lunar Dance that only Cresselia can learn. It has almost the same effect. Cresselia will faint, switch in a Pokemon, fully heal them, and cure their status ailments. But there's one difference, and that is that Lunar Dance will also cure the Pokemon's PP, the power points. The amount of times you can use a move in a battle is fully restored. And this is actually a bad thing for the flexibility of the move, and Healing Wish is a better move for the most part. Lunar Dance will also be stored if there's nothing to heal, but if your Pokemon is at full health with no status ailment, but they've used a bit of PP, the Lunar Dance will be consumed just to heal that tiny bit of PP, which is a complete waste. Maybe you've just clicked a couple attacks, but you haven't taken any damage. Doesn't matter. Lunar Dance will still consider you to be a recipient, and then the Lunar Dance will get consumed. You would actually rather store it in that case to heal somebody's health or cure their status, but you have to be careful when using Lunar Dance as a result of this to not waste it. Healing Wish is a little bit more flexible because you can switch into a Pokemon without worrying about accidentally consuming the Healing Wish in a situation where you're not getting enough out of it. And of course, beyond all these moves that deliberately sacrifice your Pokemon for one reason or another, beyond the concept of a sacrificial lead, and beyond the concept of an early game spike sack, which denies the enemy's turn, you can also just sacrifice a Pokemon purely for resource management purposes. If you are in a position where your current Pokemon is being threatened, and you don't have anything on the team that can survive the hit, you now have to make a decision of which Pokemon is going to perish. And that's an important decision. Pokemon is not a game where you always have control over what lives and what dies on your team. Sometimes the enemy is in an advantageous spot, and they are going to get a KO whether you like it or not. And it's up to you to decide which of your Pokemon that you have a bond with, that you have connected with, which one of them has to cross over today to the next world. It can be a tough decision, but you must make this decision with intelligence. If it was me, generally I sacrifice Rattata, who tends to not be very good and has low impact. If I have to lose anything, I would like to lose my Rattata. And you may ask why I would use a Rattata in the first place. It's a long story, don't worry about it. That's not something I can explain right now, it's too nuanced. But that's just an example of what you might sacrifice when the time comes, and I hope you do make the right choice. Now wait a minute folks, I've just remembered another reason that you might want to sacrifice your Pokemon. That is a recent reason. There is a new guy in the game called King Gambit, I'm sure you're all familiar with, who has an ability wherein his damage output is increased by 10% for every single fallen ally. There are scenarios where you might want to sacrifice a Pokemon purely to boost up the damage of the King Gambit, because that extra damage on King Gambit might be enough to hit a damage range that wins you the game. That is a new and improved reason that you might want to kill a Pokemon on purpose. There was of course formerly the move Rsepects as well, which has a similar effect. It gains 50 base power for each fallen ally. An incredibly overpowered move that is actually banned from competitive singles, but when it was still allowed, there were many cases where players would happily throw their Pokemon away into the incinerator simply to power up Rsepects. Many such cases. And this is why we had to ban the move. Look at what this turned people into. None of your Pokemon even matter anymore. Your Pokemon are just fuel to the Rsepects fire. Throw them into the furnace so that the Houndstone can deal more damage. You see what this move led us to become. You see the incentives this move created. None of your team matters anymore except for the guy with Rsepects in this cruel world that is created in this scenario. So it had to be banned for the good of society. It had to be. So that does it, folks. All sorts of examples of scenarios where a Pokemon might want to faint on purpose. The moral of this video, Pokemon are not your friends. They are mere resources and tools with which to advance your own agenda. And if you must throw them to the birds to be sacrificed, then do it. Do it for your own gain. If throwing Rattata away gives you a slightly higher chance to win, then you know what to do. You must throw Rattata away into the garbage. Pokemon are nothing more than tools, and that is what we must understand. Even Muck. Yes, even Muck. I would click Explosion on Muck if it meant I could trade with a Swampert. That's just too good of an interaction to pass up. And yes, I do not have a Muck, but neither do they have a Swampert. Cosmically, we are even, and the Muck has paid an appropriate price. This is just what must be done in this cruel world. Folks, did I miss any other contexts where a Pokemon might want to faint on purpose? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.